From Boss Track, it's Her Hype Squad, a show about amazing women who've made incredible strides as leaders in their industry. They're here to support you in your leadership growth, to encourage you and hype you up as part of your Hype Squad. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Her Hype Squad with Boss Track. I'm your host, Michelle Harris. In this episode, I talk with Tina Asher, a career coach who enjoys helping busy professionals get out of the rat race and build on a career that they love. Tina and I talk about leadership development, recognizing the early signs of burnout with your team and how to address it, using her change cycle to make good decisions, and so much more. Before we get into the conversation, let me tell you about Tina. Tina Asher is the owner of Build You Up Consulting, where she provides career guidance to busy professionals. Prior to starting her business, she was a regional VP for a 9-state region in the mortgage industry and served as the president of the National Association for Mortgage Women. She was a top performer in the corporate world for more than 30 years. She recently published her first book, Teetering, a frazzled, overworked person's guide to embrace change and find balance. And if you're looking to improve your relationships at work or home, get promoted, negotiate for a pay raise, or change to a new career, Tina's 5-step proven success path will help you get the results you want. Tina's passion is and has always been encouraging others to reach their full potential while balancing a full and productive life. So now, without further delay, here's my conversation with Tina Asher. Hi, Tina. I'm so happy to have you on today. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and our audience.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate you inviting me to be on your podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
And I know we have a lot to talk about and some very relevant topics for our listeners, things that come up quite a bit. But I'd love for you to start by talking a little bit about who you are and what your background is, and just to give the audience a flavor of who Tina Asher is.
Sure. Well, I live in Missouri and I am a career development coach. My company is called Build You Up Consulting, and I really specialize in 3 areas. That's leadership development, career advancement, and small business growth. And within those, there is a success path that I take people through to help them get to a better place in their career.
And before you were with the consulting company, you had quite a few years in mortgage lending, finance. Is that your background?
Banking. And yes, I had 30 years of corporate experience and I kind of moved up the ladder quite quickly. And then at the end, there was a big acquisition that happened. And I had survived many of those throughout my journey in that industry. And at the last, I did not. And my entire team was wiped out. I had to let them know that they were no longer going to be employed because we were acquiring one of our competitors. So it was quite the blow. And then I had a decision to make. Do I jump back in that rat race and try to do that? Or do I help people empower themselves to be better leaders and better managers, and that on the work side force? And so I was fortunate enough to develop my company and have been doing that for about 5.5 years now.
You are providing such valuable advice and valuable information that is missing in some areas out there. So I'm excited to talk about that and how aligned you are with, what we're doing at Boss Track as well. I'd love to hear, based on your experience and what you're seeing, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing new leaders or even leaders face today?
I think it's really a lack of people development. That's why I love what you do and what your practice is really building those leaders up as well. And I think there's a misconception that just because someone does really good in a position, like if I'm selling widgets really well and I'm the best widget seller, that doesn't mean I'm going to be a terrific boss. It's a different skill set, right? Just because you do a function very well, when you get promoted, you have a whole slew of things to manage, right? We have to manage up and we have to manage down. And that's a different skill set for both ends. So I think there's a big challenge with the professional development on the people side. I think that's key. And then I think the other big challenge that new leaders face, or leaders in general, is there's such a generation gap that is happening right now. And yet, from the baby boomer down to the Gen Z, the Gen X's, they're both needing something similar. And that is, where do they fit in the picture? And yet both sides have such expertise, whether they've been there a while or they're really good on the tech side. They still could benefit from bridging that gap between the generations. And I think there's a big lack of training in how to do that. You don't onboard the same, you don't hire the same, you don't promote the same. There's a lot of differences there.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you brought that up, because I think it was just this morning I saw an article about reverse mentorship, and a little different than what you're talking about, but in terms of like baby boomers and the older generation needing to learn more about technology and having programs in place to reverse mentor those from the new people, teaching the older people how to take advantage of technology. It was so interesting from the perspective of like, not only does that older person learn what they want to learn, but also it just empowers that younger person as well. I know it wasn't quite what you were talking about, but it reminded me of that.
No, I think you're spot on, and it's a reciprocal thing, right? It's yes, the older generation can learn from the new technical advances, and yet they're fearful because they're going to hire this young whippersnapper that's going to take over their job, and that's not necessarily the case. There are companies searching out the older generation too, wanting to hire them because of their expertise, their loyalty, their dependability, versus the job hopping and the things that we see so much in the younger generation. So there's just so much to learn and gain from both sides, and neither is right or wrong. They're just different.
Mm-hmm. And you said career consulting, what does that look like for you? Like if somebody came in, what is the process that you walk them through when they come to see you?
Yeah, first I have just a conversation, a strategy call. It's just a free 30-minute session where we really get to figure out, what are their pain points? What are they struggling with? Are we a match? There's a bunch of coaches out there, and I go with an abundant mindset, not a scarcity one. I think everyone should have a coach, but whether or not that's me or someone else, there's plenty of people out there. But it's just to really understand, where are they at? Where do they want to go? And how do I have the tools and the steps for them to get there? And then I have a success path journey that I take my clients through, and then I customize it based on each individual's destination that they're looking to do. And a lot of times the common phrase is, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And even if that's a 50-year-old person or a 35-year-old person, they're struggling to figure out their role identity and where they can find the most meaningful, purposeful work. And I help to expose what their God-given talents are in a unique way, because we're all unique. And so how do we put those in the best fitting job? That doesn't always mean leaving a company. It just means focusing in on what makes sense in the current role that they have to make them more productive, more successful, and happier.
Yeah. Very fulfilling, I imagine.
I love it. It's really rewarding when you see the light bulb go on, or you see their confidence build, or you see them explore something that they never in a million years would think, I could really be good at this. And oh my gosh, my team just changed the way they responded to me because of one little tweak that we did. And it's just been really fulfilling.
I see you have your book in the background there. Can you talk about your book? Because I think that'll lead us into the discussion that I was
Sure.
going to start.
Sure. It's called Teetering. It's a frazzled, overworked person's guide to embrace change and find balance. And it's a compilation of my journey, some of my messes and my steps in success, how people can avoid some of those things, and then some client success stories, and then some practical tips and things to do to help you embrace change and find balance in your life.
So I think we were talking a little bit about this before we got started, but with burnout, that is a hot topic that I hear today, or generally these days. And a lot of people are leaving their jobs and leaving their jobs without another job. And it's become a serious thing. And I don't know if COVID kind of drove a little more of that, and the stress of trying to manage everything from home. But what are some things that you talk about or recommend, or do you have any suggestions for people that are feeling or experiencing burnout?
I think it depends on the perspective of where you're coming from. If you're a manager, how do you help your team not feel burnt out versus the individual not feeling burnt out with the things that are happening in their culture. So if a company's downsizing and then they're throwing more work onto the people that are left, they've got to acknowledge that change and what that does to people. I think the biggest problem happens when they try to affect culture with a broad brush perspective. And what I mean by that is, if someone's feeling burnout, not every person is motivated by the same thing. So if company management says, we've got to help with culture, so let's have a group happy hour, well, that might be great for your promoter, extrovert, outgoing people. But does that mean they're going to lessen the goal? Are they going to lessen the emails that come in while they're gone, which for some other person will add more stress and burnout to them, when the intent from the manager is very good, yet it's not, you can't manage in that way anymore. It's got to be so much more individualized. And by having more frequent one-on-one intentional meetings, you can understand where the burnout might be starting and how to kind of squash that fire before it becomes raging. Because there is a lot going on in the industry right now, and people are hiring and people are just walking away, to your point. And it's been a very different environment lately. And I don't want to overstress that, but I just see so much change. Just this morning, I had a client that was sharing that their company is giving a huge incentive package for people to voluntarily leave, and so you've got to just work through, well, does that make sense? Maybe, but how can we make this work if it's not? So.
Yeah. You mentioned one-on-one meetings and for managers, and that is kind of the direction that I've gotten these questions in, is leaders trying to work through how do they manage the burnout on their teams so they don't lose the people and they support them. How do you suggest people recognize burnout early on before it really becomes a major problem for them?
Well, nowadays, I think assessments are so much more prevalent in the workforce. I'm certified with several of them, and depending on what we're working on, I make sure that we go back to the science-based tools to really kind of point to what is their behavior pattern, what is key to underneath that behavior pattern that motivates that behavior, and what causes them to be burnt out. There are some employees that have that appearance to them that they're going to just sweep things under the rug. They want to avoid conflict, and they're not going to show that they're overwhelmed, because that's a sign of weakness. When in essence, at some point they're going to blow. It's like the beach ball you push underwater. Eventually it's going to explode, right? And usually they explode to people that they care most about. And we want to avoid having that. So I think going back to those one-on-ones and really figuring out, what's working, and asking those open-ended questions, how are things going? What support do you need? Not what can I take off your plate? You're not taking that monkey off their back. It's what support do you need to get the job done that you're required to do, or that you're supposed to do? And how can I support you there? I think that's having that open communication is huge. And I think we've really lost the ability to ask questions and be curious. We have some managers that really come at it as, this is the way it's been done. This is the way it's always been done. This is how I've gotten results, and this is how you'll get results. And that's not always the right tactic or the best way. You might have some good points, but you might be pushing your people into more overwhelmed, burnout, or something else for that matter, if you're not open to asking open-ended questions.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So I think it goes back to emotional intelligence. That's another topic that's come up quite a bit recently in conversations that I've had. In fact, an hour ago, I had a conversation about empathy and emotional intelligence with somebody. So I think, definitely that's a skill for new managers to learn, so that they know the questions to ask, or even recognize when to ask those questions, and really kind of understanding those strengths and weaknesses, or how that person on your team thinks about things and how you can approach different things with them. I don't know. Do you talk about empathy, emotional intelligence?
Yes, EQ is a big topic, and I think it's getting more broadly known, but there's still a lot of people that don't really understand it. But when you recognize what stress can do to an individual's performance based on how they can regulate that and minimize that, what their self-regulation is when they're around other people is really critical in understanding the audience you're in front of, and how can you be less at blurting out what you're feeling or thinking without pausing and thinking about who's in the audience and what the after effects will be, because it takes a lot longer to clean up the mess and go back.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm curious, I am very interested in assessments. What assessments do you focus on, or do you find value in different situations?
Well, coming from the corporate world, I took a lot of them. I was in sales and sales management, and we took a variety of them throughout my career. And the ones that I've gotten certified in, I love because they're validated and they're science-based techniques. And I have a series of them depending on the level of executive or staff that I'm working with, that really can measure so many different angles, not only their behavior style, which is your common disc that you hear about, but there's an in-depth kind of disc on steroids. It's more or less on, people tend to weaponize the use of assessments in some ways by boxing someone in. And what I've found is that we're all a blend of all of these. It's just which one is the stronger muscle in a certain conversation, or what's driving that behavior to come out. It's a blending of those. And when you really understand your own self the best, then you can understand how to flex the muscle you need to the audience you're talking to, so that you can get a common yes. I don't know if I hope that makes sense. I can dial that down more, but it's just a really powerful tool to really be able to understand what's my emotional intelligence like, how am I showing up, what's the perception like, what are the assumptions that can be made based on my behaviors and my responses to things, and how can I adapt that. I write a lot about that in the book. If I want my husband to take me to a movie, he hates movies. Well, he's going to be more drawn to the science, sci-fi, beat 'em up kind of stuff. And if I'm more into the love story, I'm not going to tell him that there's a love story in my sci-fi action-packed movie that I want to see. I'm going to emphasize that so he takes me on my date, right?
Yeah.
That's, explain to the audience to get what you want. And we do that in management and in corporate and things like that. It's how do we get the yes that we need to meet their needs, not ours. It's kind of like that book, The 5 Love Languages. If you ever read that, we always try to appeal to someone else's needs.
Yes. Yeah. And I do remember way back when we originally met, we talked a little bit about assessments, because that's something we introduce in our leadership programs, more from a getting to know your team and kind of understanding their strengths and the way they think about things. We talk about a few, and I know we talked about just being careful not to use them as the end all be all, because it's a guide, and I believe people change over time too, and like you said, situation based, but also as they grow and develop. I know they have some inherent tendencies, but I could totally agree with you. I mean, somebody doesn't want to be called, oh, they're a D, they're a D, like, you don't want to be
Yeah.
known. So I think it's information, good information to have, to use as a guide, but not to, like you said, pigeonhole it. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on
Yeah.
that.
Well, they're great for hiring tools, but not as the only tool. So what I like to coach managers who are hiring a team is, maybe you have this information, to gather some ideas about the person, but you can't use that as your only justification. There's just other items that you have to bring out, but it may help steer you in the types of questions you ask,
Mhm.
so that you can understand how would they respond in this situation. If they're really slower paced and you have a very quick paced environment, how do they adapt and step up that pace in that environment? And if they're motivated more on money and title, what is your reward system for that, to show that they're going to get the money and the reward that they're looking for? There's just different things that you can ask in interviews to really kind of dive into more of the behavior and characteristic pieces of things.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring it up during the interviews. I was actually hired at one of the companies that I worked for early in my career, because they they require everybody to take a Myers-Briggs test. And my results, the executive that I was going to be working for was very heavily involved in hiring his people. And my test results were exactly his test results. So he was like, she's a definite hire. And they didn't, I mean, that was the end of the story. Like they brought me on board and then they told me that that was why I was hired, which was very, very interesting. I mean, I'd like to say that I was, qualified for the job as well. But I guess that sounds like, taking those test results to an extreme.
Well, and how did that work out for you? Did you guys get along really well? Was it a great working relationship? I'm curious.
We actually got along fine, but he didn't get along with anybody else. It it actually, now that I'm thinking, I'm like, maybe it's not so great that I was the same result as him. But no, he was one of those executives very high up in a Fortune, I don't know, Fortune 50 company, and would make women cry, run to the bathroom. I had to be the person kind of cleaning up the mess sometimes. But yeah, we had like there was a guy that was hired the same time I was, and we would go into meetings with him and it would just be the three of us. And he would be shaking going into these meetings. And I was like the calm presence and trying to like get work done and conversations had. But yeah, I would suppose, yes, we got along, but he's also the reason I ended up leaving the company. So
And I find that fascinating because quite honestly, that's typically the pattern of what people do is they hire people just like them to do the role that they think they want instead of hiring for what would make the job successful. For
yeah.
example, if I'm hiring someone and, oh my gosh, they play golf and they love red wine just like I do. Oh, I'm going to hire them, besides looking at what are the techniques involved in the work that they're going to do to make them successful. And my right hand person that I have, she helps me with everything, and I had her do an assessment, and I do that with most of the people I hire is what do you look like so that you can know my ugly warts and all, and I can know yours. And not that there's a good bad, I shouldn't phrase it that way, because there is no good or bad. We can all be great leaders no matter how our assessments show up. It's just a matter in which the way they lead. And so it was beautiful to see her graphs were completely opposite of mine. And that's what I needed. I needed her to fill in my holes, right? So that worked well. And so there's a lot of meat behind getting down in the weeds with that to understand the people that are working in your team and things. So I was curious how that was when you were so the same, because sometimes our behaviors can be the same, but what drives us is completely different. Now, if what drives us and our behaviors are the same, there'll typically be less conflict. So,
yeah, I would hope that what drove us was maybe different. I like to look back and think that
we learn, right? We don't win and lose. We win and learn, right?
Yeah. So I know one of the things that we talked about as well was approaching a decision and making that decision with confidence. Is that something that you guide your clients through? How do you talk them through that?
I'm not sure if you're referring to the change cycle
Yeah.
that I've
Yeah.
created. Okay, so I have a change cycle that I use in one of my courses, and I use it with people that are making tough decisions. And it can
Yes.
be
Yeah.
anything from, do I stay or go at this company? Do I move my family out of town? Do I hire a personal trainer, to lose a bunch of weight? You can use it really for any difficult decision. And it's really 5 categories. It starts with the first and foremost, which is most important, is this change that I want to make, is it in alignment with my core values? And I do a whole other in-depth thing on what core values are and how that applies to you and how we decide that. But simplistically, it's those things that are most important to you. How does this decision align up with that? Then second, what are you going to learn from this change? Because we'll learn something. There's something to be learned from every change we make. And then you just brain dump on each of these sections and you just really pour out everything that comes to mind. And then the third one is, how will you evolve if you make this change? What will you evolve into? How will that growth happen? And then what are the what's the impact it's going to have? The fourth one is, what is the impact it will have? Because every choice we make has an impact on others around us, everything that we do, right? So how will that impact, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, with anything around you? And then finally, what's the consequence if you do or you don't make this decision? If, how are you going to feel 6 months from now if you didn't make that change? What's going to be different if you did make that change? How will your life be? How will your relationships be? How will your finances be? How will your spiritual growth be? All of those things, depending on how they are. And then it goes back to the alignment. So it's kind of a circle. You're going in a circular pattern, but it always comes down to how much is this decision of this change going to be in alignment with who you are? Because when you're in alignment, you're going to be happier, you're going to be more fulfilled, and you're not going to be second guessing everything as much.
Yeah. And you said that's a course that you offer. Is it an online course or is it something that you have scheduled?
It was part of a course that I based off the principles of my book, but I also use the change cycle wheel in my coaching practice, and we use it with different decisions that they're going through. So I have a couple other tools that I use with it, but that's part of it. So.
That's interesting. Have you read the book Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it's Thinking in Bets. Yeah, she is a world champion poker player, Annie Duke, and she wrote a book about thinking in bets. As I read that book, it's actually at one of our book discussions. So we have a book, once a month that our community reads, and then we have a book discussion about. And this one was a little tough to read, to be honest. But the takeaway that I had was, wow, making decisions, everybody should be slowing down and putting a lot more thought into decisions. And then I was thinking about my own life and which decisions, like, I don't know, it kind of made me think, like, where do I need to put that additional thought process in place? How do people know when to apply that change cycle versus, I mean, I know there are simple decisions like, well, what am I going to make for dinner? And you don't need to sit down and do a full analysis on something like that. But like, what would you suggest? Like, what kind of decisions do you want to really think about before making?
Well, I think it might be especially for your listeners, it would be, do I take this promotion or not? Yeah, it's more money. Yeah, it might be a better title, and it might leverage you for your next position. That all could be great and exactly what you need. But how much travel will you do? What will it take away from your family? How much stress will you be under? What quotas and things? There's just so many things. Do I take this promotion or not? Do I move my family out of state to take this promotion or not?
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole lot that goes into that. Simple things like, if someone's wanting to lose weight, do I hire a personal trainer and invest in that to help me get along quicker? But then what are we going to shortchange ourselves on here? There's just so much you can really pack into that.
Yeah.
At any different level. And then once you make the decision, there's no wrong decision. Now it becomes, what did I learn from this decision so that the next time this presents itself, how do I use that experience to make a different decision next time, a better decision?
Yes, definitely. And that aligns with what she talked about too. And not to go off on a tangent on this book, but she also even talked about having, in her world, she has a group that they talk every few weeks and they assess the decisions made together to say, yeah, I made the best decision I could. It doesn't mean the outcome is not necessarily going to be the one I wanted, but I made all the decisions I should have made. And then learning from the results, if they weren't even the ones that turned out the way you wanted them to, kind of analyzing those decisions that you make and learning from them. It's interesting.
It is interesting. And to even think of, the most successful people in the world, how many times have they made a wrong decision, yet they kept trying. They didn't just give up, and they did something different, and they tweaked something small, and then they got this tremendous outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Is there something that you wish you would have known when you started out as a leader early on?
Oh gosh, yes, a lot of things. I wish I would have been okay with not having everything so perfect, like not trying to make sure that, you know, all the T's had to be crossed and all the I's dotted. It can get messy, and that's where the beauty comes in. It can be really messy. And some of my most powerful management times were when we were in the weeds. There were tears, there were things, that it's like, it's okay, we can build from this. And so, yeah, so that's part of it. And yet I think that helped me escalate my career a little bit quicker in the beginning. But I think there are some missed opportunities that could have happened if I would have just chilled out a bit. I can remember a manager telling me one time, it's just a job. I mean, when I went into something, I went in wholeheartedly, and they got 120 of me. And the problem was, who pays that price?
Yeah.
Me, my family, my marriage, my health. I mean, I write about that in the book. It's like, was that worth it? So I think for the new leaders today, there's a big advantage for them, because they can really they're starting to become more self-aware. So there's an opportunity for them to say, look, I want to have safe boundaries. I'm going to give you my all, and yet I'm going to recognize and know that this is what I will be able to do for you. If that's not enough, you're going to let me know. And if rather than the other way around, where it's like, let's go out full blast, show them all that I've got, and then you burn out, wear out too quickly, and then nobody wins.
Yeah, setting boundaries, so important for everybody. And I like to say that it's you have to have boundaries and you have to communicate them. And when people are kind of exceeding those boundaries, it's okay to be assertive and tell people, and just, do it in a kind or graceful way. You don't have to be aggressive about it, but it's so important to have them.
100%. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I made early in my career, was not having those safe set boundaries where I could really manage my time to the best for what was right for me. Because after all, we are kind of our own CEO of our world, and we've got to be able to manage that and have a good balance to be effective.
Yeah, I'm completely guilty of not setting boundaries for myself early in my career as well. And I think it's easy to talk about, but I feel like it's getting a lot more airtime and acceptability today, especially with social media. I think people just need to feel that it's okay to have them.
And what I find interesting, and I work with men and women both, and I know you focus on the women, inspiring women leaders. And I find it's harder for women to set those boundaries than it is for men. They seem to be able to do it just fine and not worry about, and I'm generalizing, and that's not fair, right? But for the most part, that becomes true. We have all these invisible tasks that are still required of us as a mother or a spouse or, an employee sometimes, that sometimes just don't get done, so.
Yeah. Now, I know you said everybody should have a coach. When you look back in your career, is there a mentor that you attribute some of your success to?
Yes, I have a mentor. His name was Mike. He's still around, but he's always been a mentor in my life. I just adored him. When I was young in the corporate world, I was doing fairly well at an early age, and he saw something in me, and I don't know what that was, but he promoted me and created a supervisory role at a very young age in my early 20s to manage 19 people. And it was ridiculous, but it was so exciting that he saw something in me. And since then, when he left the company that I was working for, he became an account executive for another very large company, and he asked me to be a sales rep with him. So again, he mentored me in a lot of different areas so that I was a better employee. I was a better person. I was a better leader because of him. And with that, I also have always hired coaches myself. That is how I got my start in my business. And to this day, I think if you hire a coach, you should ask them, are you investing in yourself on coaching? Because you should be hiring coaches that hire coaches. I think everyone can use that unbiased approach for accountability, for growth. And my goal as a coach for people is that I want to reframe them. I want to be that unbiased reflection where they can dump all their problems about what they're complaining about at work, what they're dealing with, and help me reframe that. So when they go home, They're the best parent they can be. They're the best spouse they can be. And they're not hearing them complain about their job all the time. That's my job. Let me help you with that so that you can go. And when I led teams and I managed teams, I told them that I want to know you so well that I know what makes you tick so that you can bring that to me and we can sort things out so that when you go home, you can do what you need to do at home. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I love to hear about executives that pull other people up, and especially like in not knowing 100% that they're ready for it, but like putting them into a stretch position. And I think that results in such significant growth for that person. And yeah, that's amazing that you had that opportunity and that person in your life.
yeah, I hope everybody has that. I would hope. And if they don't have it, they need to find that somewhere. There's got to
Yeah.
be someone who's going to sing their praises and lift them up and help straighten them out. I had one manager too. He saw I would always hit my goals and things. And he told my dad, I invited him to my second wedding. And he told my dad, he's like, she's like that bowling ball in the bowling alley. There's bumper pads there. She'll get to where she's going, but it might not be the straightest direction. And I'm like, that was a sideways. I don't know if that was a compliment really, but I meant it that way. But it was really funny because he was spot on. I don't
Yeah.
like necessarily the straight angle. I want to make sure that I bob and weave and do the things that make me feel I'm successful. So.
Yeah. Oh, I love that analogy. That's good. That's a good one. And we talked a little bit about wellness. So moving on to you personally, do you have any kind of routines that you do in the morning or evening or throughout the day that you attribute your wellness to, your ability to get through the day?
I do. And I wasn't always this way, but I'm a faith-based person. So I devote scripture, Bible reading, devotion, and prayer every morning if I can do it every morning. There are times when I slip up and I don't. And those are the days when my days do not work out so well. I never connected the two, but I really have a firm belief my core values are God, family, career in that order. And I won't change that. I didn't always have that. And that's where I ran into some really deep valleys in my life. And that for me is my ritual. And I know that when I do it, my days are calmer, more productive, more successful. And some people say, I don't have the time to take time to do that. It's amazing the time you find once you take the time to do it. So it's just a practice. So that's my morning ritual.
Great. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with the audience. And do you have moments where you feel like a little less confident or you need an energy boost is there like a song that you'll listen to boost your energy for the day?
Oh gosh, I love music. And I mentioned a little bit, I've been married twice now. This is my last one, I promise. I love him to death. But my first husband was really into music. And so we would always have music going. And I love music. And so my husband now, he's not a big music person. So when he's gone, I take advantage of that and I crank it up and I do whatever. But the song that comes to mind when you said that was Carrie Underwood's song, Champion. It's talking about being a fighter and a strength. It's got such an upbeat, just tempo to it. And it's just a fighter, just unstoppable type of lyrics to it, and it kind of gets me jazzed. So yeah, I like that one.
Uh-huh. I love asking that question because I don't think I've got the same answer. I mean, there's so many songs out there, but I have not got the same answer yet. And then that's a good one, Champion by Carrie Underwood. Huh.
You're gonna go home and play it tonight, aren't you?
Yeah. We have a Boss Track playlist and we're building our third one now. So, we take these suggestions and we add those. So that'll definitely be something that's on my playlist.
That's a great idea. I love that you do that.
And this is like a new question that we've been asking, and I actually stole it from another podcast. But is there something that you've bought in the last year or recently under $100 that you feel has made your life better or changed your life in some way?
This is going to sound silly, and it's not under $100 is my only problem because I can't think of something right off the top of my head that's under 100. But I did buy a desk that raises up and down that is a game changer for me because just a lot of the coaching and things, we're doing a lot of sitting and things. So it would really help me to stand and get that energy flowing a little bit differently. I even actually got a temporary treadmill to go underneath, so I could also do that while I'm on a Zoom call if I didn't need to participate in things, not necessarily when I'm coaching. I don't do that while I'm coaching, but it's just been really helpful to have that ability to stand when I want to stand and sit when I want to sit.
Oh, nice. The treadmill, the standing treadmill that you have, is it one of those ones where it's just the base and it doesn't have the like
Very inexpensive. I don't even
yeah.
remember what I paid for it, but it's not the top quality. It's not like you can run on it or anything, but at least it
Yeah.
gets you moving. So, and it would just fit underneath my desk and then I can roll it out and put it in my kitchen if I want to watch TV or something
Oh,
too. So
wow. Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll follow up with you after this podcast because I'd like to get which one you use. Because we do have a wellness section in Boss Track. That's why we talk about it on the podcast too, because I believe, like we were talking earlier, you can't be an effective leader if you're not taking care of yourself. So we do focus in everything we do on wellness. And I do have a treadmill like that I recommend, but it was really based on reviews. So I'd love firsthand experience with one to say, somebody's actually used this.
sure. Awesome.
And are there any books that you've read or podcasts that you've listened to recently that you would recommend to our listeners?
I am a self-help professional development junkie, I think. So
Yeah.
I love the Dare to Lead, the Brene Brown books, the podcast, anything from her or Simon Sinek. His
Yeah.
Bit of Optimism podcast is really good. The book I'm reading now, it's faith-based. So for your listeners that may or may not be into that, but it's called Strong in Battle by Susie Larson. Why the Humble Will Prevail is the tagline for the book. It's a great book, but those are mostly, I think anything Simon Sinek and Brene Brown have out there, they've got so many good nuggets of information out there.
Yeah. I think those are like the two biggest leadership self-help gurus right now. I can't tell you how many times they've come up in, like, even I think 2 weeks ago, the podcast discussion, we talked about both of them, Simon Sinek and Brene Brown. It's, so much to learn from just following the two of them.
And they have a joint one that they've done together. And it's kind of interesting because they don't always agree on everything. So that's been kind of interesting as well. So
Well, that is interesting. I have not listened to that one. I'll have to check that out and hear what that sounds like.
what about yours? What is one of your favorites besides yours, of course?
Oh, I really like the How I Built This podcast. So I listened to that. It's always very interesting. Businesses that you know of the product and you just don't realize the history behind how they started the business. Always so interesting to me. And yeah, I listened to wellness podcasts, and I haven't listened to Brene Brown in a while. I catch her mostly on YouTube and online. And then Simon Sinek, I catch him on social media. But I'm generally, I know I do this podcast, but I generally read more than I listen to podcasts because I don't drive as much. And I used to have a 45-minute commute when I lived in DC, and it was a lot of time. Plus we were traveling a lot. And now it's like, usually if we're on long road trips, we'll throw on podcasts and listen to them. And that's our time for that. Long answer. Sorry.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, that's good. Good.
well, Tina, I really appreciate your time here with me today. And I know we talked about a bunch of topics that are relevant and I think are going to be valuable information to everybody listening. If our listeners want to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to contact you?
Well, connect with me on LinkedIn, Tina Asher. And the name of my company is Build You Up Consulting. And it's not like you would think. It's not Build You like YOU. The middle U, it's Build You with a capital U. And I like to think of that as if it's a university, because my company is all based about educating you to be the best person you can be. So if you could think of it that way. So tina@buildyouup.net is my email address, or Build You Up Consulting is my website.
Great. Well, again, I hope people do reach out to you and learn more about what you have to offer. And I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us this afternoon. And I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for all the great things you're doing too for leaders that are up and coming. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Michelle again. Just one more thing before you take off. If you've enjoyed this podcast, consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/BossTrack or sign up for our free weekly newsletter. It's easy to sign up and easy to cancel. Every Monday, we send out a short, exclusive newsletter of what we found during the week that we're excited about, we're inspired by, and we're watching and reading. If you'd like to check it out, just to go to thebosstrack.com/newsletter. Just type that into your browser, thebosstrack.com/newsletter. Drop in your email and you'll get the very next one. Thanks for listening.